Hey guys, it's Greg with JHDrums.com bringing you another drum mixing tutorial. In today's video, we're going to get into processing our kick drum, and we're going to start by adding an EQ. So what we'll do is we'll go into our kick track, we'll go into the insert channel strip, we'll navigate down to EQ, channel EQ, and mono, just as we did with our snare and overhead tracks. And this is just a stock EQ plugin. You can do this within any DAW. But really what I want to do in this video is go over the typical practices of applying EQ to a kick drum and more or less the proper ways to go about doing so. Typically with home recordings, you have only a certain amount of inputs available to you. And more than likely, you've used only a single microphone on the kick drum. And if you've used a single mic, in most cases, that mic was placed inside the shell of the kick. Now, what this does is it creates problems for us audibly because we don't listen to a kick drum by sticking our head inside of the shell. When you stick a microphone inside the shell, you get what are called standing waves, and those are the overall fundamental sound. When you strike the head, that sound is basically reverberating between the walls of the shell. Where it is a circular shell, it creates these anomalies, and they tend to stand out in the microphone when it's capturing the kick drum sound. It's not always the case, but in most circumstances, those problem frequencies, depending on the size of the drum that you have. Now, if you're using a really big, like 26-inch kick drum, it may be that they're in a lower part of the frequency range. But typically, 200 to 300 hertz is where we're going to find these standing waves. And so that's what I like to do first, is take a listen to our kick drum, see if there's anything going on within those frequency ranges, and do an EQ sweep and find where the resonant frequency is and get rid of it. So let's listen to our kick drum in solo. And I'll go ahead and just play you what I've got here. Let's go ahead and turn up the volume. All right, so that sounds great. I was thrilled with that capture. Right away from our source, we're getting a good sound. Now I'm using an Audix D6, and these have a predetermined EQ built into them, which means that their frequency response is going to be set a certain way. Take a look. If we go into our analyzer, within Logic, you have an analyzer button. Most newer DAWs are going to have this feature in them. So just try to figure out a way to analyze what your source has captured. I'm going to turn our resolution up to high, and let's see the frequency response that the Audix D6 has captured. Notice the low end's intact. We've got a lot of information in the 50 hertz range. It seems to be rolled off, in the 40 range, maybe a little bit higher. We've got a little bit of a peak in the 100 range, but notice this huge dip. And that dip tends to center around the 500 hertz range. That's our mud frequency. And that's what they've pretty much done for us with the Audix D6, is they went ahead and they accentuated the lows and they cut out all this nasty mid that can tend to get in the way of a kick drum. And they've also accentuated the highs around 5K and up. So I just wanted to show you that because that is what I'm dealing with here. But back to the standing wave frequency, being that they do center around 200, 300 hertz, I'm going to start with my center band here on my EQ, create an EQ sweep. So I'm going to bring my Q all the way up and my gain all the way up. And I'm going to scroll back and forth through those frequencies and see if we can't find exactly where that potential problem could be, where that offending frequency lives, and see if we can't get rid of it. So let's monitor that. And already you could tell there's a lot of information there. And the D6 has done a good job of cutting this out, but see that resonance? Right around there, that's what I'm noticing in this kick drum. And there's not a ton of it because it is a predetermined EQ with the D6. But if you're using a different microphone or, you know, in any case, you want to check this frequency if you have set the kick drum mic inside of the drum. So let's cut that frequency. Basically, I'm just going to completely get rid of it. We'll bypass it and engage it as we're listening, and we'll see the difference. So this is bypassed, engaged, bypassed, engaged. So not a huge difference, but it does tighten up the kick drum and it gets rid of some of that. It's kind of a boongy sound, if you will. That's what we want to get rid of, and that's what is created when you, basically, if you were to stick your head inside the kick drum, that's what your ears would mainly pick up because of those standing waves. So that's generally the first thing I'll look at. The next thing I want to touch upon is high-pass filtering on your kick drum. Now, this really depends on your mix as a whole. If you have bass guitar and, you know, maybe, you know, stacks of guitars and you have a lot of low-end information in your mix, this is where you want to determine, do I want my kick to be responsible for the beef, basically, you know, taking control of the low end of my mix, or do I want my bass guitar to do that? And that's where you would adjust the high-pass filter to accommodate that. So, I mean, there are kick drums in mixes that are, you know, high-passed all the way up into probably the 80 to 100 hertz range, because all that's necessary for that mix is the slap of the beater. They don't need all the body. But in most cases, in modern kick drum sounds, I guess you could say, you don't necessarily have to include a high pass. I do, because I like to get rid of any low frequencies. And typically, I'll do this very conservatively. I like to keep it, you know, no more than probably the 48 to 50 hertz range. I don't want to cut any of that sub-bass frequency that's necessary to the fundamental pitch of our kick drum. So let's play and bring up our high pass just a little bit, just to clean up some of that low end body. Yeah, I could tell even in the 40 hertz range, I'm cutting a little too much. And you could tell by the frequency response, the analyzing or the analysis of our frequency curve, it's kind of done that for us as well. But this helps, you know, tame up that low end. It doesn't get in the way. If you're listening to this with, you know, a subwoofer and you've got a better representation of the sub-bass frequencies, these are the frequencies that tend to get out of hand and out of control the quickest. So it's best to include a high-pass filter on the kick if you are doing, you know, a full mix. You're not featuring the kick drum as the driving bass, sub-bass instrument. And it just helps provide headroom. So we'll go ahead and keep that there. The next thing I want to focus on, as I mentioned, I wouldn't go above the, you know, 50 hertz range on my cut, because a lot of that sub-bass boom, or that frequency that you feel more than you hear, lies in that range. And we can take a look at that with a shelf here. Let's start with around 60 hertz. I'll play it and boost it, and you can see what I'm talking about. So again, notice how all that, I mean, that's just way too much low end. Maybe, maybe not. It's your preference, and I mean, if you're mixing a hip hop record, of course you're gonna want that type of sound. But for me, I like a solid kick drum that's not super heavy, meaning that it's taking up a lot of room in the sub bass frequencies. So typically, what I like to do is use this low shelf that we have available to us in our EQ, and just play around with that. Use your ears. Determine, bring it up, bring your frequencies between 50 to around 80 hertz, bring them up and down, see where that fundamental pitch lies, and then boost or cut the taste. And I'm finding, I mean, I'm happy with the sound, but I still think it's a little bottom heavy on the D6. So I am going to cut just very slightly with that low shelf just to clean some things up. There's also a lot of information right in the between the 100 and 150 hertz range, the slap of the kick drum that's going on with this mic, and that's a proximity thing. The closer you are to the source, basically when we stick that mic inside the kick drum and the beater's right there in front of the mic, it's going to pick up a lot more of the attack, and you're going to get a transient that's a lot heavier just because of its, positioning. So check out this, around the 120 hertz range. I'll go ahead and narrow our Q, and we'll boost that and see what those frequencies sound like. A lot of that slap and just lower end, low mid punch. I'm thinking, yeah, sounds like right around 130 hertz is where I'm getting a lot of that. And it for me, to my ears, it sounds like it may be a little much. So what I'm going to do is probably just cut that and keep my, similar to my shelf, I'm going to keep that Q relatively low as well, just to kind of tame that low end and just keep it more under control. Yeah. Just a little bit tighter, a little bit neater. The next thing that I'll recommend, there's going to be the mud frequency that's going to exist in a lot of your sources. And typically what I like to do on kick drum is start around the 500 hertz range with a wide Q and just do a real subtle cut of maybe 2 to 3 dB and see if that makes a difference. So check this out. We'll go ahead and I've got it at 500 hertz with a Q of, let's bring it up just a little bit, spanning over a full octave, and I'm going to bring this down just to see if we can't tighten things up a bit. So let's turn that off and listen, and I'll turn it on, and you could tell the difference that this makes. This is without, and then with. Without. With. Just a way to tighten things up a little bit more. Now this, as I mentioned, it is a D6, and it's done a lot of that for us. So if you're using another microphone and you find that there's a lot of boxiness or, that cardboard sound, cut that mud frequency. Get right around the 500 hertz range. Tame that out. The next thing I'll look at is the attack of our kick drum. Now, for a more traditional sound, the attack is going to lie anywhere between 15K up into, 2 or 3K. And we could preview that. I'm going to bring our Q up to 1. And let's just, let's scan those frequencies here. Notice this is without and with. Brings out more of the head sound, if you will. And as we walk up in this frequency range, we get into a more modern sound. So play around, scan those frequency ranges, find what works best for you. Typically, I like for kick drum around the 5K range and just a very slight boost with a Q of about 1. Just a single octave is fine. It's enough to accentuate the beater, the click of the kick without overdoing it. So check this out. With, without, with. And that's a cool way just to, bring out the kick drum in the mix. I would recommend messing around with these higher frequency ranges in perspective of the whole mix. So as you're listening to the entire drum set or the entire, mix as a whole, mess around with that and find where the attack of the kick drum best sits within the song. The other thing I'll mention is around anywhere between 6 to 7K on a high shelf and boosting very conservatively to bring out the air of the kick drum, again, bringing out more of the attack and just giving a little bit more life and bite to the drum. So check this out. So even at 3 dB, it makes a huge difference. That may be a little much. Okay, so let's preview this. We'll preview this in solo. I'll bypass it and then engage it, and then we can preview it in the whole mix. And notice how, even with just a subtle EQ, how big of a change this makes on our kick. So before, kind of flabby, and I'll engage it. Tighter, more focused, a little bit more bite, and that's what we want. Bypassed and engaged. Much better. Let's listen to it in perspective of the whole mix. Sorry, let's go ahead and open our EQ back up. I'll bypass it. Yes. Bypass. Engage. Cool. So we've overall improved the sound of our kick drum by making use of a high pass, a low shelf, getting rid of the standing wave frequency problems that we might run into by miking the kick drum on the inside. We've tamed down the mud frequency around 500 hertz, and we've had a little bit of attack and life or bite to the kick drum. So, guys, do this. Add subtle EQ changes. highlight the parts that are necessary for the track and get rid of the parts that you don't need, and just, subtly shape that sound. And do this to make better drum mixes, guys. In the next video, we'll get into compressing the kick, where we will further tighten the sound, bring it more up front in the mix. Again, if you have any questions, guys, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'm Greg with JHDrums.com. Thanks for hanging in with us, and we'll see you in the next video. Have a good one, guys.